Hey there, friends and enemies, Joper here again, and today I want to give my full thoughts on Dragon Age The Veilguard after finally completing the game, doing everything I personally wanted to do within it, and getting the Platinum Trophy on PlayStation. So I know there's been a lot of controversy around Dragon Age The Veilguard, seemingly since it was initially revealed, but I also think a lot of the narratives going around about the game are very misleading, whether they are from the anti-woke crowd, people who don't think it is a Dragon Age feeling game, or other criticisms that I tend to disagree with. It's not a perfect game by any means. Anyone who would say this is a 10 out of 10 flawless title, I think, is a little bit misleading as well. But overall, I enjoyed my time with it. I think there's a lot of little things that people miss when you're just watching the highlights that I think make this game feel very good, especially as you get to the end. And I think there are some changes that they made that really fit the game if you see it all the way through, even though they might not feel great in the very beginning. So I'm going to explain all that and go over my thoughts. So first off, even when the companions were initially revealed, a lot of people said it looked too Disney. They didn't like the new art style. It had Fortnite-like appearance, and I understand a little bit of that, especially that initial trailer, but BioWare has a history of making these trailers for companions or some part of the game that doesn't really fit the tone of what the actual game is going to be. And so while the characters may look different and they went with a new art style, it has been 10 years, so that's not entirely surprising. A lot of the game looks fantastic as far as the visuals, the customization, the backgrounds and environments. All of that I think is really well done, and I think the character models fit within that, and that's why they went in this direction. Especially when you look at some of the cutscenes, I think the characters look phenomenal in them, and so when you're looking at just different parts, it may not seem to fit. But then you get into the Disney issue where people say the game isn't necessarily as dark as you would want, but one of the very first missions, and I'm going to get into slight spoiler territory, nothing too crazy, but one of the very first missions takes you to a village where you end up seeing the mayor who's trapped in some corruption. There's dead bodies everywhere, and you have a choice to either let the mayor die of the corruption or kill him outright. And it is a pretty dark setting for a game that is supposed to be more lighthearted from what you would think from the outside looking in. And I think a lot of people have not seen those parts, or they just didn't pay attention to those parts of the game. The Siege of Weishaupt, their final 6 hours of the game. There's a lot of dark tones and dark fantasy aspects in the game that can be easily overlooked when you see that the companions are having this lighthearted banter, when you feel like the companions and Rook are not having any kind of disagreements within the group. You don't really make any evil choices. You can't really piss off your companions in a way that you could in other games. And so while I do not necessarily mind that personally, I understand folks who wanted a darker tone. However, there have been stats released on video games that a small percentage of gamers actually ever selects to go down the evil path unless they replay the game. And again, that's a minority, a very small minority. It was put out with Mass Effect and other games of that nature that the Renegade option was less popular because people like to play good guys in video games. That may sound crazy if you just look at all the information that you see online, people saying that they want to play dark evil characters. I actually really enjoy doing evil playthroughs, but this is not what this game was, and I didn't have an expectation that I would be evil in this game, so it never really bothered me. You can't be as edgy as I think some people wanted to, but again, I think they wanted to have the Rook in this game, the main character, have a certain appearance, a certain tone, and I think he fit that. People seem to forget that in past Dragon Age games, from Dragon Age Origins, but more so in Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition, the main character has a general persona that is only slightly modified by their selection, what kind of actions you choose. It does feel like you follow a similar path. And so while you can get separate endings, while you can get different romances, different outcomes for your characters, your companions, I do feel like expecting the main character to not have its own personality in the game is a little bit silly. A lot of folks compare this to Baldur's Gate 3, and that's just a completely different type of game, story, and everything. That's a generational title, one that I feel like you can't compare any other RPG to. You look at the last 10 years of RPGs, what other games can compare to the selections, the choices, the offshoots of missions, the consequence of actions to Baldur's Gate 3? It's very slim, and the developers at Larian made a ton of different games before they eventually arrived at Baldur's Gate 3. So this wasn't something that they just did by accident. And the folks over at BioWare, they've tried a bunch of different games. They went from Mass Effect Andromeda into Anthem, which didn't perform very well, and then they went back to Dragon Age. So it's not like they're hyper focused on this one type of game. I think if you split BioWare and you had a Mass Effect team and a Dragon Age team, that might perform a little bit better and have them specialize more. But again, I think expecting much different from this game in terms of the direction of the story and the character was a little bit silly. Now, I do wish there was a little bit more friction with the companions. We see it with Davrin and Lucanus, who end up having a bit of a disagreement as far as how the situation with the first major boss is handled, but neither of them really ups the intensity in a way that made me believe they were like genuinely pissed at each other. So I do think that is a somewhat fair criticism. I do wish there was some more friction with the companions in general, but again, one of the things that makes this game so great to me is it feels like a traveling party of friends, even though they meet relatively recently. As you're roaming through the cities and landscapes of the game, the side conversations are phenomenal. They do an insane level of detail to all of the different interactions that you can get, and they're all based on a variety of factors. Which city you save in the game, which companions you bring with you, which character you romance, what side quests you've done for each of your companions. And so there's a level of detail there. And the conversations, I think, are part of what makes the game feel more alive to me. I feel like while I have my party with me, there is always something to talk about, always something going on. So you could just roam the city. And if you romance a certain character and that character's with you, other companions will bring that up and make jokes or hint at the romance. And I think that's what I really love about this game. It does feel like the companions have a lot of heart. There's a lot there to really enjoy if you just take a step back. Not all of it is combat focused. I do understand the criticisms of combat shifting gears a little bit, because I know this game has transitioned from, as a franchise, from Dragon Age Origins, which is far more tactical, into this action RPG where you don't even control your companions. But I thought the skill trees were very cool. I thought a lot of the combat, it looked very nice, and overall it was very impactful. When I made a build, I could change them on the fly for free, which was very nice. But I tried a bunch of different builds with unique items, with different armors and different companions, and some of them worked better than others, but you could really pinpoint a certain type of build and focus on that in a way that in the past was a bit harder to do. And so while I understand that, I also know that Dragon Age Inquisition won Game of the Year. It was the best-selling BioWare game ever, and sold, Dragon Age as a whole has sold more than Mass Effect in the subsequent titles since Dragon Age Origins. So because of that, I think I am not surprised that they've leaned heavily into the action combat and tried to make it more mainstream. Because don't forget, Baldur's Gate 3 came out last year, so they wouldn't have had time to adjust if they wanted to go back down that route now that a lot more people are enjoying and understanding that turn-based combat. And again, Baldur's Gate 3 is an anomaly. It's a generational game, and not a lot of other turn-based types of games will appeal to a more casual audience, a more wide range group of players compared to something like Dragon Age and action RPG combat. So I do find that to be understandable. It does feel like it took some inspiration from games like God of War, which I understand. And overall, as a big fan of the God of War games, having it in a more medieval type of setting with magic and everything, I think felt pretty good overall. I really enjoyed it. Some of the boss fights are tremendous. There are some, there was one boss in particular that heals itself quite a bit. That felt very cheesy, but overall, I felt like there was a lot of variety, a lot of options when it comes to making your builds and fighting all the dragons, which was awesome. There was just so much there that I really enjoyed that I feel like people overlook because they see some of the early gameplay and it looks simplistic, but as you get on, I had a build where I was popping my ultimate pretty much on cooldown. I could pop it 2 times in a row if I really wanted to and do insane damage and just go to town with it. And I feel like that's where this game can be very good. I fought a boss when I was like 23 levels under what I should. It took me a long time to beat. But again, there's a lot of that within this game. There is that flexibility. There are side missions and options for you to do at various levels that can test you if you really want to. You can play the game on harder difficulties. So I do very much enjoy the game overall. I thought it was fantastic as far as a title goes. I think if it didn't have the Dragon Age name associated with it, it probably would have been received a lot better. And that's where the setting of the expectations is hard. The story, the last little less than 6 hours, I thought was fantastic. The way they do the ending of the game is phenomenal. I would say that anybody who plays this game, if you're halfway through and you want to get towards the end, the ending is fantastic, and I think anyone should experience it because of how good it is. Not everyone is going to enjoy the ending, and there are some choices to make, some problems in it, but overall, I thought the ending was well worth the rest of the game. And if you don't enjoy the game whatsoever, don't play the full 60 hours or whatever the case may be. But for me, the ending was fantastic, and it was one of those where I'm a big fan of having memorable moments in games. I think sometimes games can quickly be forgotten. You beat a game 6 months down the line and you're like, oh, what happened here? Whereas games like Dragon Age The Veilguard are definitely going to live with me a lot longer. And so that automatically ups the score for me when I'm rating a game, just because I feel like I was impacted by the game, and not every game will say that. There will be some folks who complain about the game being woke and the non-binary character in the game, and to that I say it's a side quest. You don't have to do it. You don't have to make your character trans. You don't have any other gameplay effects to doing so. So it's a silly thing to complain about when it's such a minor part of the game. And for folks who are impacted by it, who have lived as a non-binary their entire lives, I do believe that this is a helpful representation for them. So I don't think that's a valid argument whatsoever, and anyone who brings it up, in my opinion, has always been just fighting a cultural war because they don't want to admit that the game is not for them, and so it's just absolutely silly to me. Other than that, like I said, good notes. I thought combat, especially as you got later on, is fantastic. The ending and the story towards the back half is a lot of fun, in my opinion, and really impactful. The companions, the way they interact with Rook, with everybody, with the world, I think all of that is fantastic. The side content, all of the quest lines for your companions, also very, very good. I do think that there was some missed opportunity within the game as far as just generally having a little bit more friction, a little bit more difficulty as you're recruiting your characters, maybe some rivalry between groups such as the Antivan Crows or the Shadow Dragon, something like that, to have them really kind of be at odds and you got to fight your way to bring them together. Something like that might have been more impactful, but otherwise I think a lot of the complaints about the game are overblown. I would absolutely recommend, if you are a fan of action adventure games, action RPGs, to give this game a shot. I think it is very, very good, and it deserves to be played by a lot of people. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I know there's going to be a lot of backlash from people who are just anti-culture war or culture war type of warriors, like people who are always upset about that stuff, but honestly, I don't care. I enjoyed the game. That's all that matters, and I hope you do too. My name is Jopa. Have a good one. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you all later.